The sky was heavy that morning, a gray sheet pressing down on the cemetery. My hands clutched my children's, their small fingers trembling inside mine. I could barely see through the blur of tears as two coffins lowered into the earth. My mother and father, gone together. I thought nothing could hurt more. But then my husband leaned close, his breath brushing my ear. I want a divorce. It's over. 6 words, spoken over fresh graves, split my chest wide open. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Grief and betrayal collided inside me, leaving me hollow. He chose that moment, the lowest point of my life, to destroy me. My name is Claire. I'm 38 years old, a mother of 2, and until that morning at the cemetery, I thought I had built a life of quiet steadiness. Most mornings in our house began the same way, sunlight slipping through half-closed curtains, the smell of toast and coffee drifting from the kitchen, and the sound of my children bickering over something small. Those little arguments always made me smile because they meant my kids were alive, loud, and unafraid. I worked as a school administrator, the kind of job that didn't impress anyone at dinner parties, but gave me a sense of purpose. I loved walking through the halls before students arrived, the smell of pencil shavings and floor polish lingering in the air. My desk was cluttered, sticky notes, pens with no caps, a chipped mug my daughter painted years ago. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I wasn't someone who needed grand gestures or lavish vacations. I found joy in the small things. Folding laundry while listening to old love songs on the radio, planting basil in the backyard each spring, hearing my son laugh when he read a comic book. I thought those simple rhythms were enough to keep a marriage alive too. My husband, Daniel, was different. He was ambitious, polished, always scanning the horizon for the next opportunity. People admired him, though most never saw how sharp his words could be when the front door closed. To the outside world, we were a solid couple, comfortable middle class, the kind of family you'd see in a holiday card. But inside, cracks had started to form. There were evenings when he came home late and spoke to me as if I were a secretary who had forgotten to file his papers. He would dismiss my small triumphs, like getting through a chaotic day at school, or saving enough to finally repaint the kids' room. "That's not an achievement, Claire," he once said, loosening his tie. "That's just what you're supposed to do." I told myself he was tired. That marriage went through seasons. That love wasn't supposed to feel like fireworks every day. The truth is, I leaned on my parents for the kind of love Daniel never gave me. They were gentle, steady people. My father used to call me his North Star, the one who guided him when age began to weigh him down. My mother, she was my confidant. Every Sunday afternoon, we sat on her porch with mugs of tea, talking about the children, work, and sometimes the silences in my marriage. She never pushed, never judged, just listened. Losing them both in a single car accident felt like having the floor ripped out from under me. One phone call, and suddenly the 2 people who had been my anchor were gone. The days that followed blurred together. Arrangements, casseroles from neighbors, papers to sign. My children clung to me like shadows. I moved through each day numb, breathing only because they needed me to. It was in that state, tired, broken, holding my children's hands, that Daniel chose his moment. Looking back, I realized he must have been planning it for weeks, maybe months. To him, my grief wasn't sacred. It was convenient. But at that time, I didn't know what my mother had left behind for me. I didn't know that a letter, folded neatly inside her Bible, would be the key that changed everything. I met Daniel when I was 24. I still remember the way he carried himself the first night, confident, like the world owed him a space at the table. He was working in finance, always talking about numbers, markets, and the future. I was drawn to his certainty. At that time in my life, I wanted someone who seemed sure of everything. When we married, he promised me stability, a home, a family. And in the beginning, he delivered. Our first apartment was tiny, but he painted the walls himself and insisted we buy a second-hand couch because one day, we'll laugh about how broke we were. I thought that meant we were building something together. But small shifts came over the years. After our first child was born, Daniel's hours at work grew longer. He said it was for us, for the house we dreamed of, for the vacations we couldn't yet afford. I stayed home for a while, exhausted but grateful, believing him. What I didn't notice or maybe refused to, was how little space he had for me. I would share something small, like how our son had drawn a crooked sun with purple crayons, and Daniel would barely look up from his laptop. His eyes were always elsewhere, chasing something bigger. Money became his language of love. When I told him I felt lonely, he'd respond with, "Didn't I just upgrade your car? Or we're putting in granite countertops, Claire." Most people would kill for that. I learned to silence my needs. By the time our daughter was born, the silences between us had grown thicker. Sometimes, lying in bed, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder when exactly I had become invisible. He still introduced me proudly to his colleagues at company dinners, but the warmth was for show. Behind closed doors, I was more caretaker than partner. There were warning signs, ones I brushed aside because admitting them would mean admitting my marriage was crumbling. He began guarding his phone. He'd step outside to take calls. His laughter, a sound that once belonged to me, now lived on the other end of late-night texts. Once, when I asked why he was smiling at his screen, he looked up sharply and said, "Don't be paranoid, Claire." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it creeps in, silent and ordinary. One evening, weeks before my parents' accident, I was folding laundry in our bedroom when Daniel's phone lit up on the nightstand. A message preview flashed before the screen dimmed. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." The sender's name was hidden by a heart emoji. My chest tightened, my fingers trembling as I folded a towel over and over until the edges lined perfectly. I didn't confront him. Not then. I told myself maybe it was innocent. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But deep down I knew. The second moment came at a charity dinner. Daniel introduced me to a woman named Marissa, all polished hair and red lipstick. Her hand lingered too long on his arm. She looked at me with polite indifference, like I was furniture in the room. When I teased him about it later, he smirked. "She's just a colleague. Don't start making drama." But the seed was planted. Then came the worst of it. The night before my parents' funeral, I was sitting at the dining table, surrounded by sympathy cards and half-eaten casseroles. Daniel walked in, crisp shirt, sleeves rolled up, as if he were heading to a meeting rather than preparing to bury my parents-in-law. "We need to talk soon," he said, his voice businesslike. I looked up, tired, hollow. "Can it wait?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Fine. Tomorrow then." I thought he meant after the funeral. After we put them in the ground. After we mourned like a family should. But no, he chose the graveside. The moment my knees nearly buckled from grief, he pressed those 6 words into my ear. "I want a divorce. It's over." I remember turning to look at him, my face streaked with tears, soil still fresh under my shoes. For a heartbeat, I thought I misheard him. But his eyes were steady, almost relieved, as if shedding me in that moment was freedom. That was Daniel. Practical. Efficient. He couldn't even grant me a few days of dignity. And yet, in my mother's Bible, tucked between the pages of Psalms, was a folded letter with my name on it. She must have placed it there weeks before the accident. In her delicate handwriting, she told me something I hadn't known. Years ago, my grandmother had left a trust in my name. My mother had safeguarded it, waiting for the right moment to tell me. Along with the letter was a small brass key, taped to the paper, leading to a safe deposit box. I didn't understand the full meaning of it then. I only knew that while Daniel thought he had cornered me, my mother had given me a hidden weapon, one that would later become the foundation of my revenge. The weeks after the funeral felt like walking through fog. Each morning I woke up expecting to hear my mother's voice on the phone, or my father's slow shuffle across the porch. Instead, there was silence. My children clung to routines, homework, bedtime stories, Saturday pancakes, as if by holding on, they could keep the world from collapsing any further. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed lighter. He moved through the house with a casualness that felt cruel, humming while making coffee, scrolling through his phone during dinner. It was as though burying my parents had untied some invisible rope around his neck. One evening, I found him in the study, pouring himself a drink. "When do you want to start the process?" he asked, his tone clipped, businesslike. "What process?" I whispered. "The divorce, Claire. We can't just sit in limbo forever." The way he said it, cold, detached, made my stomach twist. Daniel, my parents died 2 weeks ago. He sighed as if I were being unreasonable. I know it's hard, but dragging this out won't help either of us. Especially not the kids. They'll adjust faster if we're clear. Clear. That was his word. He wanted to be clear. As if slicing a marriage in half was as simple as cutting through paper. But it wasn't until the bank statements arrived that the fog truly lifted. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through a pile of unopened mail, when I noticed several withdrawals, large ones. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. Transfers I hadn't authorized. I flipped through page after page, my pulse racing. Daniel had always handled the big finances. I managed groceries, utilities, the kids' school supplies, but he kept the savings under his control. My parents trusted him too. After all, he was the one with the financial expertise. I stormed into the living room where he sat with his laptop. Daniel, what are these? I held up the papers, my hand shaking. He didn't even look startled. Investments, he said flatly. Investments? These are withdrawals. You've drained half our savings. Finally, he closed his laptop and looked at me, calm in a way that felt rehearsed. I moved the money because I knew this was coming. Divorce lawyers, settlements, it's messy. I'm just protecting myself. Protecting yourself? My voice cracked. That money isn't just yours. It's our children's future. His expression hardened. Claire, don't be naive. The kids will be fine. You'll be fine. But I'm not going to let you take me to court and bleed me dry. I've seen how ugly these things get. The arrogance in his voice made my grief ignite into something sharper. I never said I wanted a divorce, I said, tears burning in my eyes. You don't have to, he replied coolly. I do. I stared at him then, really stared, and saw the man beneath the suit and the charming smile. He wasn't cruel in the way of fists or shouting. His cruelty was quieter, strategic, measured, meant to leave me doubting myself. Later that night, when the house was still, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding my mother's letter again. My fingers traced her handwriting. Claire, if you're reading this, it means life has turned difficult in a way I couldn't protect you from. This trust is yours alone. Use it wisely. Do not let anyone take it from you. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than grief. It wasn't hope yet, but it was a spark. The next day, I tried to talk to Daniel again. If you're serious about this divorce, I said quietly at the kitchen counter, then we need to be fair. The savings, the house, the custody. He cut me off with a sharp laugh. Claire, you really think you're in a position to bargain? You've worked part-time for years. Everything you have is because of me. If you fight me, you'll end up with nothing. The words stung because I had let him control the narrative for so long. I had let myself believe I was powerless without him. But that night, lying awake while his steady breathing filled the dark room, I realized something. He didn't know about the letter. He didn't know about the trust. He thought I was cornered, weak, dependent. And for now, I let him think that. Because hidden in my purse was the brass key my mother left me. And tucked in my heart was a quiet promise. I would not let Daniel walk away with everything. He had chosen the timing of his betrayal. I would choose the timing of my revenge. Sleep became a stranger. Nights stretched long and restless, filled with the sound of the clock ticking on my nightstand. I would stare at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks in the plaster while Daniel slept peacefully beside me. His breathing was steady, like a man without guilt, while my chest ached with thoughts that wouldn't stop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the graves, the fresh soil, the weight of his words. I want a divorce. It's over. 6 syllables echoing louder in the dark than in daylight. I began pacing, first across the bedroom floor, then into the hallway, then down the stairs into the kitchen. Sometimes I made tea, though I never drank it. It sat cooling on the counter while I pressed my forehead to the cold glass of the window. The house at night was both a comfort and a curse. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of old wood beneath my bare feet, the faint scent of laundry soap from the utility room. All the ordinary things of family life. Yet here I was, realizing that family, as I had known it, was slipping through my hands. Grief sat heavy on one side of me. Betrayal, hot and sharp, on the other. I swung between the two, unable to rest in either. One night, I pulled my mother's letter from the drawer again. The paper had softened from how many times I had unfolded it. My eyes lingered on her final words. Do not let anyone take it from you. That sentence lit something inside me. I thought about my children upstairs, sleeping in tangled sheets. They had already lost their grandparents. They could not lose their home, their stability, their mother's strength. If I collapsed now, everything would crumble. That night, I whispered aloud for the first time. No, Daniel. You will not take everything from me. It startled me, hearing my own voice steady in the empty kitchen. The next morning, I went to the bank with the brass key. My hands trembled as the clerk led me into a quiet room with beige walls and a humming fluorescent light. She slid a small metal box onto the table. When I opened it, I found documents inside. Papers tied with a faded blue ribbon, and a leather folder embossed with my grandmother's initials. Inside was the trust my mother had written about. The balance stunned me. It wasn't billions, not even millions, but it was enough. Enough to buy me time, to give me options, to free me from depending on Daniel's mercy. For the first time since the accident, I felt air fill my lungs fully. Still, fear was never far behind. I didn't know where to begin. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a financial strategist. I was just Claire, mother, school administrator, woman who had spent years silencing herself. Could I really fight him? The self-doubt was loud. At work, while I sorted attendance sheets, I heard Daniel's voice in my head. You've worked part-time for years. Everything you have is because of me. I gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles whitened. That night, I wrote down every fear in a notebook. What if he takes the kids? What if I run out of money? What if no one believes me? Page after page, my handwriting slanted and desperate. But beneath those questions, I wrote one line in capital letters. What if I win? The shift was subtle, but real. I began collecting things quietly. Bank statements, emails, receipts. I made copies and tucked them into a folder I hid in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet at work. Daniel didn't notice. He was too busy playing the part of the successful man ready to move on with his life. The insomnia didn't end overnight, but the pacing changed. I wasn't just wandering in circles anymore. Each night I drafted lists, small steps I could take, questions I needed to ask, people I could trust. My reflection in the mirror looked different too. Not stronger yet, but sharper. My eyes no longer belonged to a woman only drowning in grief. They belonged to someone planning, someone preparing. One evening, as Daniel left for another business dinner, I stood at the window, watching his car pull out of the driveway. Instead of tears, I felt something steady settle in me. You chose your timing, I whispered. Now I'll choose mine. For the first time, my grief had a companion, resolve. The first step was admitting I couldn't do it alone. One Saturday morning, I dropped the kids at a friend's house and drove to the office of a lawyer whose name my mother had once mentioned. Her voice echoed in my head. If you ever find yourself cornered, call Ellen Jacobs. She's sharp, but fair. The office smelled faintly of old books and coffee. Ellen was in her early 60s, silver hair pulled into a bun, reading glasses perched low on her nose. She listened as I poured everything out. Daniel's withdrawals, the timing of his announcement, the trust my mother had left me. When I finally stopped, she leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. Claire, what your husband did isn't unusual. Men in his position often think control equals power. But you have something he doesn't expect. You're prepared. Her words steadied me, though fear lingered. Can I win? I asked quietly. You won't win everything, she admitted. But you can protect yourself, and your children. Especially with that trust. She tapped her pen against the folder of documents I had brought. He can't touch this. It's in your name alone. I left her office with a mixture of hope and dread. Hope, because I finally had someone in my corner. Dread, because now Daniel's arrogance wasn't just insulting, it was dangerous. The setbacks came quickly. When Daniel was served the first notice, he stormed into the kitchen, his face tight with fury. You went behind my back? His voice was low, dangerous. You went behind mine first, I replied, though my hands trembled as I rinsed a plate in the sink. He leaned in, close enough that I could smell the cologne he always wore. You're making a mistake, Claire. You can't win this. I'll drag you through every courtroom in this state. I'll take the kids if I have to. His threat clung to me long after he left the room. That night, I cried quietly in the bathroom so the children wouldn't hear. Was I risking everything by standing up to him? The second setback was financial. Legal fees piled quickly, eating into the trust my mother had left me. I cut back on groceries, canceled streaming services, and started selling old clothes online. Every dollar mattered. The third came in the form of whispers. At school, I overheard parents murmuring, "Did you hear about Claire? Daniel's leaving her. Must be awful." Some tilted their heads with pity, others with barely concealed curiosity. The shame was heavy, even though I knew it wasn't mine to carry. But each time I faltered, something pulled me back. One evening, I found my daughter sitting cross-legged on her bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Mommy, are we going to lose our house?" she asked, her voice so small it nearly broke me. I sat beside her, pulling her close. "No, sweetheart. We're not losing our house." My words felt like both a promise and a vow. That night, I stayed up past midnight, combing through old emails. Buried in Daniel's account statements, I found evidence of transfers not to investments, but to Marissa, the polished woman from the charity dinner. Rent payments, luxury gifts, weekend getaways. The pieces clicked together, sharper than glass. He hadn't just planned to leave me. He had been funding his new life while standing on the ashes of mine. Still, even with evidence, progress was slow. Court dates postponed. Lawyers arguing over details. Every delay stretched my patience thin. Some nights I lay awake wondering if Daniel was right, if I was too small for this fight. But then I remembered the graveside. His voice in my ear. "I want a divorce. It's over." He had chosen to wound me at my lowest. So I pushed forward. I learned to copy every document, save every text, track every inconsistency. I became sharper, less afraid of confrontation. One afternoon, Ellen looked across her desk at me and said, "You've grown tougher, Claire. I can see it." I didn't feel tough. I felt exhausted, brittle. But maybe toughness didn't mean feeling strong. It meant moving anyway, even when your legs shook. The setbacks were real. The doubts, constant. But beneath them was something Daniel hadn't accounted for. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for the children who held my hands at the graveside. The ones who deserved better than a father who treated family like an inconvenience. And with every page of evidence I gathered, every sleepless night spent planning, I moved closer to the moment when the truth would no longer hide. The moment Daniel would finally see he had underestimated me. The hearing was held in a plain courtroom with beige walls and buzzing fluorescent lights. Nothing about it felt grand, yet I knew this room would decide the future. For me, for my children, and for Daniel. He walked in first, confident as always. His suit was perfectly tailored, his hair styled, his expression smooth as glass. Marissa sat in the back row, red lips curved in a small smile, like she was watching a play she already knew the ending of. I sat straighter in my seat. I wasn't the woman he whispered, "It's over," to at the graveside. Not anymore. The judge called the case to order. Papers shuffled. Lawyers exchanged polite nods before sharpening their voices like blades. Daniel's lawyer painted me as dependent, fragile, someone who would collapse without his financial support. "She has only worked part-time," he said, voice clipped. "She owes her stability entirely to her husband's income." I kept my face still, though my stomach churned. That was the story Daniel had been telling for years. That I was small, weak, invisible. Then Ellen stood. Calm, deliberate. "Your Honor, we have evidence that tells a different story." She handed a thick folder to the clerk. My heart pounded as page after page of bank statements was displayed. Transfers to Marissa, hotel bookings, luxury gifts. Numbers that told the truth Daniel had buried beneath his charm. Daniel shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. The judge looked over the papers, then up at him. "Mr. Lewis, can you explain these expenditures?" He cleared his throat. "Business-related. Networking events. Client hospitality." But Ellen wasn't done. She rose again, her voice sharp. "Funny, isn't it, how these client expenses match the dates and locations of Ms. Marissa Cole's travel records? Here are copies of her lease agreements, signed by Mr. Lewis. He wasn't investing in his marriage, Your Honor. He was investing in another woman. A murmur rippled through the room. Even Marissa's smile faltered. I watched Daniel's mask crack, the cool confidence slipping into something harsher, defensiveness, panic. He turned to me then, eyes dark, as if to say, "How dare you?" But I didn't flinch. The judge turned back to me. "Mrs. Lewis, is there anything you'd like to add?" I rose slowly, every nerve in my body alive. "Your Honor, when my parents died, I thought I had lost everything. And then, at their funeral, my husband told me he wanted a divorce. I was grieving, raising our children, trying to keep our lives from falling apart. And while I did that, he was funneling money to another household. I'm not here to punish him. I'm here to protect myself and my children." Silence fell heavy after my words. The judge nodded. "The court recognizes the trust fund left to Mrs. Lewis by her late family as her sole, independent asset. Furthermore, given the evidence of Mr. Lewis's misconduct, the court rules that Mrs. Lewis will retain primary custody of the children, as well as the family home. Mr. Lewis is ordered to pay child support accordingly." Daniel's face drained of color. His lawyer leaned close, whispering frantically, but the damage was done. The truth was laid bare, and no performance could erase it. I sat down, my hands trembling under the table, not from fear, but from release. When the hearing ended, people filed out quietly, casting sideways glances at Daniel. Marissa slipped out quickly, her heels clicking sharp against the floor. She didn't look back. Daniel lingered. His shoulders, once squared with arrogance, now slumped. For the first time, he looked smaller than me. He approached slowly, his voice low, stripped of confidence. "Claire, we can work something out, can't we? You don't have to destroy me like this." I met his eyes. For years I had shrunk under his shadow, made myself smaller to keep the peace. But not anymore. "You destroyed yourself, Daniel," I said quietly. "I just stopped covering for you." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. No words came. He turned and walked out, his footsteps uneven, the sound of a man who had finally realized the ground beneath him was gone. And I stood there, steady, knowing the truth had done what I alone could not. It had broken the illusion he had built. The days after the hearing felt strangely quiet, as if the world itself had exhaled. For the first time in months, I woke up without the weight of dread pressing against my chest. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, warm and soft. The children padded into my room in their pajamas, climbing onto my bed as if the courtroom battle had never happened. My daughter tucked herself under my arm and whispered, "We still have our house, right, Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart," I murmured, kissing the top of her head. "We still have our house." The relief in her little body was so palpable that tears pricked my eyes. They hadn't understood the legal details, but they had felt the tension. Children always do. And now finally they could rest. Daniel tried to call me 3 times that week. Each time, his name lit up on my phone screen. I felt a strange detachment. Once, I would have picked up out of duty, out of fear of what silence might cost me. Now I simply let it ring. He had spent years making me feel small. He no longer had that power. Word spread quickly in our community. At the grocery store, a woman I barely knew stopped me near the bread aisle. "I heard about everything," she said softly. "You're stronger than I could ever be." I smiled politely, though inside I didn't feel strong. I felt tired, bone-deep tired, but also clear. Strength, I realized, wasn't about being fearless. It was about refusing to bow when the storm tried to bend you. There were moments of unexpected sweetness, too. My father's old friend came by with a box of tools from my parents' house. "Your dad would have wanted you to have these," he said. Among them was my father's watch, scratched but still ticking. I slipped it onto my wrist, feeling his steady presence with me again. At school, my co-workers treated me differently. With respect. One afternoon, the principal stopped by my office. "Claire, I don't know the details, but I've seen you walk through this year with more grace than anyone should have to. If you ever want more hours, or even a leadership role, we'd be lucky to have you." For years, Daniel's voice had echoed in my head. "You're nothing without me." But here was proof undeniable that I was something. I was capable. I was enough. Evenings became my favorite time. After the kids went to bed, I'd sit on the back porch with a cup of tea listening to the crickets. The garden my mother once helped me plant was still there, basil and rosemary pushing through the soil. Life had gone on without me noticing, steady, quiet, waiting for me to return. I thought often of my mother's letter. Do not let anyone take it from you. At first, I thought she meant the money. But now, I understood. She meant my dignity. My voice. The self I had nearly lost in the shadow of Daniel's control. The house no longer felt like his. It felt like mine. Ours. A place rebuilt, not on fear or control, but on quiet resilience. Still, I couldn't deny a part of me wondered about Daniel, the man who had once been my husband, the father of my children. I heard he had left the firm, his reputation tainted by the exposure. Marissa, unsurprisingly, had moved on. He was living in a small rental across town. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly. It wasn't joy to see him fall. What I felt was balance. He had tried to leave me stripped of everything, and now he was the one empty-handed. One evening, weeks later, he appeared on my porch. His suit was wrinkled, his face unshaven. He looked smaller, deflated. "Claire," he began, his voice hoarse. I held up a hand. "Don't." His eyes searched mine, desperate, maybe even repentant. "I made mistakes. I know that. But please, I don't have anyone else." The old Claire, the one who silenced herself, who bent to keep the peace, might have invited him in. But I wasn't her anymore. "You chose this," I said softly. "At my parents' graveside. You made your timing clear. And now, Daniel, you live with it." His shoulders sagged. For a moment, he looked like he might argue. But then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I closed the door gently, leaning against it for a moment. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I felt only calm. Because I knew the truth. I wasn't ruined. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't alone. I had survived him. And in surviving, I had found myself again. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the children are asleep, I sit by the window and think about the day my parents were buried. About the words Daniel whispered into my ear when I was already drowning in grief. There was a time when that memory cut me open, over and over. But now, when it surfaces, I don't feel shattered. I feel awake. Life has a way of stripping you bare, forcing you to see what you are without the safety nets you once leaned on. When my parents died, I thought I had lost the roots that held me steady. When Daniel left, I thought I had lost the future I had built. For a while, I believed I was nothing more than the wreckage left behind. But I was wrong. What I lost was an illusion. The illusion that my worth depended on someone else's approval. That security came only from another person's promises. What I gained was something stronger, something no one can take. The knowledge that I can stand, even in the storm. I think of my mother's letter often. Do not let anyone take it from you. At first, I thought she meant the inheritance. Later, I understood she meant my dignity. And now, I believe she meant even more, my life itself. My right to joy, to peace, to love without fear. My children still ask about their father. I never poison their hearts against him. One day, they will understand the truth in their own time. What matters is that they see their mother whole, not broken. They see me laughing again, tending the garden, showing up to every school play, every bedtime story. They see that loss doesn't have to end you. It can teach you how to begin again. Daniel's absence is no longer an open wound. It is simply a fact, like the changing of seasons. And like the seasons, life moves forward. I am not the same woman who stood at the graveside, shaking, desperate, undone. I am someone stronger, sharper, quieter, perhaps, but alive in a way I had never been before. And that is the real inheritance my parents left me. Not money, not property, but the unshakable truth that even in the darkest moments, I am enough.